Привет.
Hi.
Мы начинаем сегодня.
We are going to start day 3 of our conference. This is the final day in a series of 3 days talking about digital workers and all issues related to algorithms, production, various iterations of digital labor and the relationships between employers and freelancers, between developers, software developers, programmers, and various experts involved in the field. Day 1 of the conference, we invited some bloggers who keep blogs, who have accounts. We had Lola Novrek, Nika Wardwood, and Alisa Kalintseva. On day number 2, we had representatives of the Moscow taxi drivers trade union. We also had Lasik, who studies unstable employment, Siasidis, and anti-job. Today, we are going to focus not so much on the relationship between the platforms and people employed by the platforms, not so much the sociology of relations, labor relations, so within a team. We're going to talk about the sociology of the tools that sort of glue together all of these employment relationships. And we're going to talk about this with software developers and people that are involved in generating digital content. Unfortunately, one of our invited speakers was unable to join us tonight because she is unwell. And well, I would like to say that these unexpected events make us think about the instability of the situation with emergencies and force majeure being always there, part of our activities, including in the environment that we live in. I wanted to highlight some specific nuances that have to do with digital work, introducing us to what we're going to talk about today. Talk about the specific nature of labor that has to do with developing and generating digital content. I wanted to remind you that in 2020, Big Games, a company that develops games, issued a graphic software called MetaFumas. It's an ultra-realistic and accessible constructor of digital people, and the revolutionary quality of this release is about to step over the Erie Valley effect, enabling us to construct people in all sorts of spheres, from acting to gaming. And it's based on choosing various elements from a library of preset elements. Any gender, any ethnicity, everything can be customized. This sort of presets are called assets, digital assets. For digital objects, it's a unit, it's an independent code element that can be a media file, a texture, an archive, an email, or a blockchain token. Asset is like the brick, the building stone of digital nature. The nature of content generation, this accelerating nature when the quality and the speed have to compete, leads to a logic of the contemporary conveyor. And the modern anti-utopias has robots producing other robots, stamping eternal hands and parts of the bodies in virtual plants. In the modern reality, this fabric is part of digital automation. The pipeline describes all stages of production, from software and ways of data transfer from one package to another, and the outcome. The elements of the code produced in one spot can be modified elsewhere, coded in a third spot, stored in a fourth spot, and essentially it goes through all of the stages of a factory cycle. This system can be viewed as an industrial economic symbiosis of humans, software, and products. And here we can talk about the concept of augmentation. In the cyberpunk world, this term is usually applied to acquiring some organs that expand your capabilities. The computer is a way to augment the human component, and the human is an augmentation for the computer. If we go back to meta people, factories are made of freelancers, where you have video cards instead of mills, or when you have users that have to be participating in content generation, and people producing programs and programs producing people. This is the new conveyor. When we talk about updating capitalism, including new agents all the time, expanding workspaces and sales markets, can we always keep saying yes to new technologies? Progress that expands exploitation, including avatars and codes, is limitless. One of the areas for using digital humans, CGI plus artificial intelligence, is the service sector. The sleepless, always looking good assistants, virtual assistants, and then the owners of the platform would get paid for the service. How do we conceptualize labor within digital production, digital manufacturing, and how should we view code? Is it our competitor, our employer, our servant, or is it just a new consumer in this endless cycle of product exchange? Today, joining us for the discussion, Ellina Gennadievna. Ellina Gennadievna teaches software development at the Business and Economics School. She's also an artist. And we've got danilaplee, who is a systems architect, a programmer, and an activist. And I would like to ask a generic question to begin with to get us started. To understand the nature of what you do. How would you describe your role in the process of digital production? And could you please tell us a little bit about the context of what you do and how you got where you are today? Ellina, let me begin then. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. I'll start a bit from afar, how I became a digital worker, if we've got the time, because I think that's important. I got a conservative education, if you will. I went to university in Kazan. I was at the Department of Cybernetics and Digital Sciences. I was going to be a software developer, and I guess I am in a way. At school, we had some classes, we had some IT, but not enough. And then it took me 2 years of extra classes. I had a tutor, and I would like to thank him greatly for introducing me into this new context. And then they started like counting in the Tatar language when I got there, and I was really put off by that. But like all of the like started from the very beginning, how people started initially used the fingers of their hand to count, and all of the digital content is based on ones and zeros, like the binary code. And this is the key difference from perhaps other fields and areas. So I was a mathematician. I was at this cyber sciences department, and I started to work in the field professionally, helping with platforms for highly loaded systems. Systems with loads of data, and you have to input or output something very quickly. That was my first experience, practical experience working in the field. I was working there for about 4 years when I decided to move on to a new startup, and I was really excited by what they were doing. They had these trainers for surgeons using a different programming language. It was a visual language, and there was differences in the structure. And it's not more awesome than the text one, but nonetheless. And then at some point, I switched to art. There was a break in my IT career. I went to Moscow. I went to the Moscow Rodchenko School. And it turned out that everything I was doing before that was like really helpful. And it was a way for me to reuse it at a new level, not just disregard it and move on. Because you can talk about modern areas of art, media art, various tools. And so when you know programming, you can do something, you can create a new game, a new environment, a new experience in terms of interactive elements. More often than not, these would be some kind of programs. Sometimes you don't need the basics of programming, but if you do have the skill set, it's really helpful. And it was a completely new universe for me. Like I discovered Unity, which is an engine to uh, produce games and not just games. I really like that it's based on like these assets. This is what Sari was talking about at the very beginning. That there's some multiple assets that you can just add without having to program them from scratch, and you can combine them in new ways. Having graduated from the Rodchenko School, I started to teach, which is also a great experience. I teach something that's not just programming, that too, but also in terms of how to create an artistic product. Something that, well, it's not that it's going to be interesting in terms of like capitalism, in terms of how to execute it, but for it to be like based on some kind of awesome idea that you would be delivering some kind of message via a game. Well, I guess that's all. That's all I had to say at this point. So, Sarah, Danya, could you tell us then what you do? Can you answer the question? Danila, could you remind me of the question because I kind of forgot. Sarah, yeah, what's your role in digital production? What is it that you do? How did you get where you are today? What are your functions? What are your goals? Danila, well, yes. So let me start by sharing my journey. My story is a bit different. I've been doing programming since childhood, but I've never been like super focused on it. Um, just before I graduated from college, I'm a linguist, and I got excited by Perl. I knew computers, I knew how they work, but well, I didn't really like get into programming. When I got to college, I started to. I knew Visual Basic from school. That's it. And then I started to master Perl, and I wrote a number of ads. So um, I was like self-taught, and for the last 10 years, I've been working on web programming. Over the course of, I guess, 7 years, demand for web programming increased significantly. and other areas that I was working in, sort of. Uh, I stopped. I used to do music, and now because of the coronavirus, it's in a deplorable state. There's not much you can do, and other areas of, um, like I used to do a bit of design as well. I was mostly self-taught in all of these areas, but well, my linguistic education helped me because now I have access to English speaking, English documents, descriptions, etc. I'm kind of against fundamental education per se because, well, back in my college days, I'm not sure. Well, I got some knowledge, but I just think it was mostly a waste of time. And all of the useful knowledge I got independently from the internet. But if you can't speak English, then I guess, well, um, I guess you do need fundamental education. In terms of programming, what I've been doing for the last 6 years is creating a primary context. A lot of the products can be created when you have employees with no qualifications whatsoever. Well, not qualified. You're creating like a low quality product, and this low quality product would lead to the fact that you can't monetize it. Essentially, you'll just waste your money, and you'll create like a product that's never going to take work, like a simulacra. For people to be able to trace the order execution, you need to set up quite a bit of infrastructure, particularly for large scale projects. About 18 months ago, I was working with such companies as Sberbank and Gazprom and Megafon, a telecom operator, and they have a huge team of DevOps experts that support infrastructure and development. And that's mostly what I do now. I think through architecture, not just in terms of how the product is going to go into production and, well, at the end of the conveyor line, but the way it sort of emerges at the beginning of the conveyor line and what has to be done for the machine to be able to process it and get it to some kind of final form. That's more or less what I do, like talking widely about it, but I also work with games, game development. I'm working on a number of video games, one on Unreal, and another one using the Rage engine, which is used by GTV. I have extensive experience in all sorts of engines, mostly with the actor module, which differs from what Unix uses, as far as I remember. So I guess it'll be interesting to discuss our different points of view. That's all I had. Sarah, thank you. My second question, and this is what I would like to discuss, it describes the structure of modern production, the so-called asset thinking, which is particularly relevant recently. This thinking that enables you to add these individual modules, so like this modern conveyor. What do you think about this asset approach in internet platforms, game developments, etc., and this conveyor production versus unique content? What do you think there? And the production plant of digital content, where do you think that's evolving? Process automation for you, what is that? And what is the role of the individual developer? Ellina? Ellina, thank you for the question. I think there is this distribution between like this asset thinking and unique content in the question, sort of embedded. If I understood it correctly, there seems to be a divide, and I would like to blur that divide. because well, when you add modules in, if you're not doing anything on your own and you're just adding different modules, nonetheless you have a chance to produce something unique. That's my opinion. In addition, it's interesting that Danila also said that he does music. I also do music. And I guess there are some parallels there as well, because very often in music we use some samples. When we produce something new and unique, there's a number of absolutely awesome albums that are entirely made of borrowed sounds. Using samples from others. There's a whole genre like hip hop. It would not be able to exist at all if it didn't use this asset approach to creating the content. Another problem that I wanted to highlight, I guess, very often there are concerns that if you're using something created by someone else, you don't know if it's open source. If you found this online, that does not necessarily mean that it's cleared in terms of the rights. Perhaps it's been like stolen and you just found it, happened to stumble across it, and it wasn't intended for public use. There's a lot of rights related to copyright issues. And the same applies to hip hop. In fact, there's lots of copyright issues there. There's a number of instances when really awesome, well known hits were sued and lost because were based on sounds that were illegally appropriated. Recently, we had a conference where we were talking about the use of like borrowed content and combining that to create something new based on somebody else's mm, proprietary content. And I really liked the comment that was made. I don't remember who, like there was a girl, like a researcher. And if we approach this scientifically, when there is some kind of invention or a discovery, it's the first person that gets the fame, but then later on, everybody uses those because that's how science functions. So yes, of course, you can create your own unique content by combining bits and pieces of content created by other people. And this module-based approach to like gaming, Unity, teaching, another point that I wanted to make here. When I start to introduce my students to Unity, the first thing well, if they're starting to like use other people's codes and sets and presets, and they use that to create something of their own, that's half the job done on my side, because they're looking for these bits and pieces themselves. I can see that they're interested. And they don't know how to program, but nonetheless, they can already make a statement. That's all I had. Sorry, thank you, Danila. I would like to support Ellina. This comparison with music, I think that was particularly interesting. That this when samplers and romplers appeared back in the 70s, that's when they started to use like, and meta programming came to music before it came to programming, in fact, because in the 80s there was no need for meta programming on a common computer, but you needed to create an instrument that would enable you to program a sequence of sounds, an accessible tool. So the samplers that came about, which are in fact meta programming devices, and recently I was analyzing this phenomenon. This meta programs lead to well, we can very simple is we can have a lots of parallels between Michael Jackson and the Russian band Kino, and ideologically they're very similar as well. And sound-wise, there's lots of parallels. And what came first, the chicken or the egg? That's a big thing. The idea of creating a song or the the needed sequence of assets appeared, and do assets lead to content generation at all? I think this is like a separate topic for discussion. The way I see it, at least in my experience, working with GitHub, that's an NFT now. GitHub, this is like endless NFTs. Um, each code, you've got a private key of the person who made the code. So we live in a world essentially where everything is built based on assets which are signed by people, including the app that we are talking through now. We are living in a world of NFTs, if you haven't noticed. So assets are they don't just enable us to create; they generate themselves. So, we see one, we get inspired and we create a product based on that. And the same happened in the 80s with music, and now it's just rolling out to like rolling out across the board to all the other sectors. And in my work, there's another trend that I've been noticing because there are a lot of people that are able to generate these assets, collaboration is required. So all of the other professions are now starting to assemble these repositories, etc. Because programmers came up with this at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s. But now everybody is going to be working together collaboratively online, and everybody is going to need similar systems and approaches. And NFTs are just an example of the GitHub, which is going to become available in all of the professions. If you ask me, well, I forgot what it was called actually. Like it's like the key asset that needs to be signed is the constitution, and like all of the laws, it has to be signed and get everything has to be absolutely transparent. The essence of Get and blockchains, all of this division into blocks. This is the system that will enable us, the society in the future, to rely on assets and to freely share these elements. Currently, we're working with assets that could have viruses in them because they're not signed in any way, but it's all going to be moving towards personal signatures being used, and in our work as well, and everywhere else. That's, I guess, all I had on this. Sorry, thank you. A question that I have related to this. Could you imagine a situation whereby, well, for instance, you have this conveyor of digital production. Could you imagine such areas of employment when people are only producing a certain product, like people, for instance, that make money by generating stock content, like 3D models or jingles or images. And this type of work, could it be kind of like a specialized type of work? Or is it impossible to conceive as like a type of permanent labor and an employment? What would you say about this type of production?
I have two comments. So I think your question was about this kind of narrow specialization. First of all, everything speeds up a lot. So I think it becomes irrelevant at some point. because everything changes, including technologies. So you have to change all the time too. And sometimes, like, the era changes really fast. In a week, there may appear an update on hardware or software. For example, 2 years ago, I had a goal. Unfortunately, the third speaker is not with us today, but I wanted to create my copy as a 3D model, and that was quite a difficult task. And I found one company that did that in Moscow, only one. 2 years passed. The company that does that is not the best anymore. There is another one that does it many-fold times better, and there are a lot of apps on the phone now that enable one to do everything for free, the same things that I paid money for. So this is the first thing. And another thing is that mostly this is freelance. So you have to work as a self-employed person, as a self-employed professional. At some point, I had my favorite channel about Unity. I loved it. I watched all the tutorials to study myself. Then it shut down. It shut down not because it had very few subscribers, not because it was made redundant, but because the blogger just got bored with it. And he decided to do something else. And in this sense, when you don't work for a corporation, when you work for yourself, as for this tiredness, you can just quickly understand it, this burnout. You can feel it, and without any losses, you can change what you do. So I think my answer would be that this is impossible. Thank you very much. I have another question about algorithms that are present in any kind of work. And the logic of the process and the programs that one may use. Are algorithms friends of a designer, and the systems of artificial intelligence and robotization of processes, do they help artists, designers, software engineers, or do they discriminate? What do you feel? What do you think? I think Daniel also wanted to answer the previous question.
Насчет производства ассетов меня на
Yeah,
самом
that's
деле
true.
ну,
I have a completely different experience, a completely different practice. As for the code, every day
и как бы вы
GitHub
можете их решать.
features hundreds of bug bounties, and it's up to you. If you don't work for
решая
a
за них проблемы в их
corporation,
коде. И, ну,
then you can solve these issues in the web code for different corporations. So you won't be producing it for the market. You'll be working for corporations, but without being employed by them.
например,
Or you can design open source modules
Мне
and
кажется,
create paid add-ons to them. I'm not sure. As for the code, yes, I think you can get burnt out everywhere, but with coding you can find regular work. As for the visual resources, I'm not sure, but I also heard a lot of information from the people who practice that. Thank you very much for passing me the mic. I can repeat the next question if you feel like that. Yeah, please do. Algorithms, do you think they are friends for a designer, and the systems of AI, tools, and robotization processes may help authors, may help designers, or do they discriminate? What do you think?
Спасибо. Мне кажется, вот это один из тоже ключевых вопросов. В каком смысле? Что вот у меня, да, как раз в отличие от другого спикера, у меня вот это фундаментальное образование. Я тоже как бы очень сейчас скептически к этому отношусь.
Frankly speaking,
Сложилось, да?
I'm also quite skeptical about this. So this is what I see in practice around me. As for us, we were taught to write the code, the algorithm from scratch and to understand what is good and what is bad for coding. And you had to understand what an algorithm should be like, and everyone was able to write an algorithm from scratch. Just recently, I came across an article which I think is very timely. There was an article titled Designers who can write algorithms become niche experts. So they said that designers who write algorithms from scratch now become a rarity. Of course, if you're a cool expert, if you're a great professional, then you will find something to do. But as far as I see, now it's more in demand to be able to use others' products, to use the code accessible already. And I heard it from employers too, from those who interview many designers. And I can see another question in the chat. The modular approach to design seems more flexible from the point of view of market value and the market development. I think it's a question from YouTube. So this is the same. If you write an algorithm from scratch, you need to double check it, you need to test it, and you need to add something besides the algorithm itself, some interface. I mean, if you aim to solve a particular task. But if you know some ready-made patterns, some ready-made codes, they must be already tested. And they have been used by many people who turn to the same libraries. So they're much safer and much easier to use. If that's okay, I would like just to quote this article. So people who write algorithms from scratch become niche professionals, and those who can use the existing libraries are in extreme demand. Any library is supported by a community. So the situation is changing really. Now, cutting-edge professionals have to know where libraries are. They have to be able to use what they have available rather than write everything from scratch. Thank you very much, Danila.
Ну, сейчас, да, вообще, продолжая тему идеи Елены, сейчас вообще...
Yeah, building on what my colleague has just said, around us we have code-free programming. For example, you can create a website without any coding. So I think programming is a thing of the past already, but not quite really. Because if you know the algorithm, then you understand how your system works. If you don't know the algorithm, then you understand it just superficially. And there is a thin line you have to walk on, you have to keep to. You have to know what the algorithm is, you have to be able to find the code. And I wouldn't say that it's very easy to merge all these things together. And if you don't understand how it's all organized, then you may not be able to do it. I write algorithms very rarely. So basically what I write is the glue that connects a lot of the algorithms. Some of these algorithms are not even produced by my company. Many of the algorithms were even written before many of us were born, even before I was born, that's for sure. And as for friends or enemies, I can't really answer this question because I believe we don't even see the majority of algorithms. And the algorithms that we see, you just have to understand how they work. And it makes no sense to create them from scratch, especially in neural networks. The algorithms are so difficult that no single person will be able to support this genetic algorithm, for example. So as Ellina said, there are experts who work on algorithms, and everybody else uses the ready-made algorithms already. So basically everybody who uses the internet uses the algorithm traveling salesman. So traveling salesman visiting different cities with a minimum amount of jumps in between different cities. This algorithm is not named in discussions, but it's the foundation of the internet, really. And there are a lot of examples like that. If all designers had to work from scratch, their lifetime would not be enough to make a single website, for example. And I think that's great because it helps us, it forms a kind of a symbiosis. So we all can live with it, even if we don't understand some of the algorithms, I believe. I wanted to comment on your answers too, if that's okay, because together with the algorithms, what we have are new ethical issues, new ethical problems which we encounter lately. Algorithm as a product of a human brain has the same issues, the same problems as the human brain does. And this is a new wave of ethics, which was part of these algorithmic decisions. For example, searching for images online, what is generic information, what is original, what is unique information, automation, hidden content, and different problems that are entering our world now together with the neural networks when they discriminate certain knowledge or certain information. Because at the very beginning, at the input, the data was overloaded with biases. So injustice from human beings now shifted to algorithms and is becoming bigger and bigger. And I wanted to ask you a question again here, because it seems that these algorithms are our colleagues, and for some of us, they are our employers. If we take the case of platforms, sometimes they are our employees on the contrary when they work for us as a filter on Photoshop, for example. And at the same time, they also make the disbalance stronger, the lack of balance stronger.
Есть такая фантазия о демократизации горизонтальности, когда мы
There is a fantasy about the democratization of horizontality. So online, the society is more visible, people are more visible to each other, and this urge for democratization and more horizontality is facing another problem, this kind of new hierarchies. And I wanted to ask you a question here because of digital practices and algorithms. Well, we could remember China here. where a ranking has been introduced for every citizen, and any citizen can be found because of surveillance, cameras, and all of these things are done not by people, but by algorithms. This is a very hard problem, I believe. But at the same time, we can understand where it's coming from. Yesterday, I watched an interview about a maniac who was released. As far as I remember, he kept locked 4 girls for a few years. Now they are adult women who have their own families. So the interview was about them being worried. They don't know where he is. They don't know if he knows their address. So there is an overall a general desire to make these marginal personalities visible, for example, to get notification about their displacement, about their itineraries, or at least when he is employed, this information has to be visible for the potential employer. This is also, I believe it is also a very difficult issue. So when we outsource it completely, we hand it over to algorithms, then I know for sure that bugs or mistakes will always be there, and we won't even be able to see these mistakes for what they are. And I've heard a few cases during the COVID pandemic when people received fines for violating the regime of the lockdown, though they never left their apartment. So it was a mistake of the system, but you have to pay a real fine. And this is something really hard to undo. You need to go to court. So it's easy to understand where these problems are coming from. There are a lot of advantages of these processes we are living through now. Or if we take the death penalty, why are many people against the capital punishment, the death penalty? Because there is always a chance of running a mistake. It could be 1 in a million, but you will be killing an innocent person. The same would be for these surveillance strategies. Yes, it's a good thing to be able to organize all systems better, but people may be deprived of their liberties, and these algorithms are always prone to mistakes.
Да, да. Ну, на самом деле, вообще цена ошибки в высоконагруженном проекте любом это
Actually,
бесконечное повторение, это ошибка.
as for
Это просто
a mistake, the cost of a mistake is just the eternal repetition of this mistake in programming.
на самом деле
More
пользователь
load,
даже
more
не
mistakes.
делает
When we
текущий момент
use
подставил
Facebook,
сервера, там все
we
сгорает,
don't even realize that some of the servers get burned, something fails, it's all relaunched. It all seems very flat to us, like now we are talking on Zoom, but at the same time, one server gets disconnected, another server joins the network, and so on and so forth. So this is a whole system that provides for the stability, and these systems are so well developed that we don't even see how imperfect they are. They eternally recreate themselves in front of us, and the mistakes are recreated all the time. And this bias is just one particular example of these mistakes. And we all face bugs, of course. And there are whole departments that solve these issues.
Проведением так называемых QA, то есть quality assurance. И, например, программисты в своей работе вообще как бы, ну, можно сказать, они как дети.
And as for programmers, in their work, they're like children. Of course, they bear responsibility for what they do, but they don't see the end result. This whole industry is based on this. If we, all programmers, were forced to do everything perfectly well, the industry would have stopped. To implement even the simplest feature, you need to go through millions of aspects in your head, and it's impossible to make it perfect. So we can't predict how the system has to behave in all situations. And as for a neural network, millions of options are possible there. And as for bias, bias is inevitable, like in any programming endeavor. So as a result, I think that humanity has to invent a system of mitigation of all this. We either have to... Yeah, so what I see is that the problem of bias is because we don't have the necessary diversity in the quality control department. So we need different races, different ethnicities, all possible genders, and so on and so forth. So we need all possible combinations to run through. This is the only way to fight bias. So if you tell web designers it's your problem, well, they just won't write anything because they will be investing months into all the possible combinations. So I see always that people think that these problems are easy to solve. No, we can just choose the option that is less evil. This is it. Can I add just one thing? I wanted, and we have comments from a sociologist, Lilia, on YouTube. On the level of recommendations, ethical problems can be solved by engaging ethics experts on all stages of development and technology dissemination. With algorithms, a separate issue is about the boundaries of decision making, how the decisions are made, and who is responsible for them. I wanted to quote an interesting example about these boundaries. Let's imagine a robotized car, an automated car. So like you're not driving the car, the robot does that for you. Quite recently, manufacturers face the following issue. If there are two barriers in front of the car, for example, the system of vision recognized a child and an old man, and you need to turn either right or left, you can't hit the brakes, so you will have to run over the first or the second. How to write such an algorithms? It used to be written, it used to be coded, but then people decided it was unethical to try to see who is more important. And now this decision is randomized. So the algorithm is written in such a way that it doesn't know where it will decide to turn. Even all the participants are recognized. So neither age nor gender will influence this decision of the algorithm. So the ethical problems can also be solved with randomization.
Да, спасибо. И о случайностях и вообще об этических проблемах я хотела бы спросить задать такой вопрос, который ближе...
I wanted to ask another question, which I think is more about the role of a human being in this. industry. So my question will be this. What is the situation with discrimination like in the digital industry, in programming, in coding? I mean, sexism, ages, different biases.
Как вообще система, потому что там же есть как бы, ну, кроме знания, да, которое
So besides the knowledge, which is produced and passed on, which is inputted and outputted, there is also a society, a community of the workers themselves, an office. For example, we know about a huge number of problems in the gaming industries, a huge load of biases. And I just wanted to quote an example, if that's okay. The Epic Games company that produces software for digital games. I mean, the good policy for every company will show that you're tolerant, that you provide workplaces for both men and women, and in the promo of their websites, you can see that everything is 50-50, like all the pictures, all the images represent both genders.
Опять же, хотела вернуться к тому, что несмотря, что кажется, что вот есть такая как бы за цифровым производством мечта о демократии.
But although there is this dream about democracy behind digital production, however, the society stays the same. Rather, the society is transforming just the same. If we take the broader society and the community around the digital production.
Я вот думаю, может быть, первый тогда ответит Данила.
Okay, maybe Danila can go first.
Я, честно говоря, я не уверен, но
frankly speaking, I'm not sure. I mean, if you're a good professional with a beard like I am, you are not likely to face any discrimination ever. I don't know what to say, really.
Могу точно сказать, что в сильном мужском коллективе, конечно, присутствуют, какие-то там, скажем так, мужские правила.
However, it's true that if a team, if a community is male only, then it will have, so to speak, male rules. But if it's gender balanced, then it's completely different.
Как и во всех других компаниях, как правило, где есть рамки, эти ограничения связаны.
So I think it depends, really.
Не знаю, с корректностью. Но, в общем, я последние 2 года
For the past 2 years, or even more than that, I work as a freelancer most of the time, and it's quite strange to talk about these things like this. I mean, I think this is the first time I enabled my camera for like in a year or so, so I don't see any difference between people. They are of the same gender to me, so it's hard for me to judge the situation in this regard.
Первое, что тоже я хотела вспомнить, началось все в университете.
Well, it all started at the university.
В университете, когда я училась,
At the university, when I was studying, I didn't have any image in my head about sexism, ageism. I didn't know that this was a thing. As for our group, I would say that we had around a distribution of 50-50 between men and women. We had great students, both male and female, and I thought that your code matters more than your gender or your age. It is not so. The first thing I faced we had a class in psychology, and psychologists came and they told us that you're most likely to face it because they carried out a piece of research that was 10 years ago. Of course, the situation is different now, but I just remembered it. The experiment was as follows. They came to different companies and just asked the employer to make a table of the best employees, their names and their positions. This is it. The list had both male and women names, and so the situation seemed okay. There were good female programmers and good male programmers, and among beginners, it was 50-52 again. But then the psychologist did the following. They asked to see the salaries of these employees, of these workers. And what they found out was that men were getting 20% higher salaries on average than women of the same status. And it wasn't that surprising for the participants of this survey, and not even for the experimenters, but for the company directors. They didn't even expect that. They started to try to research why it came about, and it came about because of bonuses, because of awards. So that was the first thing that I faced in this business.
Последнее, с чем я столкнулась, я поступила недавно в школу программирования.
Another thing I recently came up against, I entered a programming school. It's a free school, not going to name it. So I entered the school, and recently there was a branch that was opened in Kazan. Now I moved to Moscow, but nonetheless, I had a look around. It looked great, and what they were particularly proud of, and it's like a whole chain of a global network that's a global one. They started in France, and now they have branches in Asia and in the US and everywhere. So like it's a franchise of programming school, and in Kazan, we have the highest ratio of women to men. And you know what our school is proud of? 20%. 20% of 100. It's a huge amount of females enrolled in the school. And can you believe that? And yesterday I had a look at the stats. Those that do like programming stats for 2020, like software developments, it's 80% of women. 80% are women. So talking about inequality being a myth is wrong. We need to speak about this. We need to bring it up. We need to raise awareness. 20% is not a good ratio. That's not a good message. Hopefully, like in 2021, we understand that female brains they function the same as male brains, and there are also some stereotypes like before you entered this world. Like my dad is an engineer, and my mom graduated from the same faculty as myself. And in this sense, it was easier for me because, well, I just got lucky. There was no bias within my family in this respect. But they are out there. So sometimes even the basic understanding is lacking that you could be a developer. Everybody would tell me like you're a great manager just because I'm a girl. So it's a huge issue. There's a lot of pressure. It's great when you're not stuck in an office, you can work remotely, you don't see the employee, but nonetheless, you know who you're dealing with, even if you can't see the face.
Сейчас, например, есть тоже какой-то у меня отдельный проект, где
I
куча
also have
людей
like a project with lots of people. I can still see how the manager treats women and men. And it's not always bad towards women, it's nothing radical, but nonetheless, if a man does something, it's quoted across the board, like they did this and did that. Uh, have a look at his awesome input, his great contribution. And when a girl does the same thing, and even if she does more, even if she's part of all of the email exchanges and all of the chats, and she promotes her important contribution, it's just not noticed. Nobody's saying she's doing a bad job, but it's just so you just it's as if you're invisible. But the guy did this, and he's awesome. Yeah. So yeah, it's there. It's part of our life, and it's important to raise awareness. It's important to talk about it. So thank you.
Спасибо. Ну вот я бы сказала еще, что кроме дискриминации есть еще позитивная дискриминация, когда
There's also positive discrimination as well that happens as an attempt to balance out this sort of imbalance. You could take like very basic situations and as an example, like internet forums, when there are guys hiding behind female nicknames. You get more benefits sometimes hiding under a female nickname because, well, you attract more attention. But aside the professional software development community, there are other areas, digital areas like cybersports, for instance, where there's this revolutionary transformation ongoing. It's a slightly different area. This is something closer to big money because there's lots at stake. There's bets being made. There's lots of gambling associated with that. And sexism as a theme and homophobic moods and transphobia, they are so vivid, they are so apparent that it really makes you think. A profession doesn't always address your issue. The society is similar across the board. If we need to transform the society, this should be the primary goal. Ellina, I have a question for you because you're also working with students, working with the people who are only embarking on the life journey, and I guess in a way they're more idealistic, looking forward. They are more full of vitality, more energetic, and they haven't come up against grown-up issues yet. So perhaps you could somehow talk about this a little bit, like the student generation. How do they enter the profession? How do they start development? How many people get disappointed? Or perhaps there are others that leave to do freelance, or they pick up something entirely different. So it's interesting to try to make out like the first link, the preparation of new professionals. That's very interesting. I was thinking about it in my university. There was no bias. There was no sexism. And I'm seeing a lot of equality around myself as well. Those people that want to become game developers and just like
Вот, поэтому
says equal share of everybody, transgenders as well.
более friendly,
So it's more open, it's more
и
friendly.
нет перекоса, и
There's no
я,
imbalance.
конечно, все равно наблюдаю с таким немножко с надеждой на то, что это изменится, например, когда
I'm hoping this will
дети становятся,
change.
да, все равно как бы пол притягивает пол. Вот,
Like when we break into teams,
люди,
because people do tend to flock together with the same gender.
очень много
But recently, I've been seeing a lot of like girl developers and software developers, girls
как-то такого, ну, причем хорошего уровня, да, ну,
of a great level as
кажется,
well.
что это только
So I think,
особенно сейчас, что в процессе обучения,
particularly now in the
современных методологий, да,
with
обучения,
new methodologies,
проблема не стоит.
I don't think it's a problem anymore.
Проблема такая не стоит. Возможно,
I don't think it's a relevant issue. Perhaps.
будешь презентовать. Еще хотела сказать, тоже мы...
Well, there's one thing I wanted to say. I have lots of colleagues, lots of teachers, not always teaching programming, but nonetheless. And there is this sort of tacit like agreement or like understanding that when you put in an effort, when you're trying, it doesn't mean that you're going to make it because, well, sometimes you don't have the self-assurance, sometimes you get the talent, but girls are more assiduous. Girls do put in more effort in terms of like being disciplined with their homework, etc. But it's not like really critical. In terms of like people switching to other professions, well, yes, but a very small percentage. I think that's always part of life, particularly if you're very young. And it's great if you realize that that's not something you want to do. You can just like switch to another like a faculty or a department, and everybody's super mobile these days, and that's a good thing. And it even makes things more interesting, in fact. Sorry, Danila, I wanted to ask you, what do you feel about education and trainings for programmers? Do you have any thoughts and ideas on this? Because there are so many online schools popping up these days for almost anything and everything you can imagine, and including like software elements and information in terms of how to become a software developer or how to master new knowledge. And this is booming. There's so much new stuff. And it would be great to get some feedback. Like, well, what do you think about it?
Ну, я вообще был у истоков школы программирования.
Danila, well, I was there at the very beginning of these programming schools in Russia. If you remember, like the Moscow schools, back in 2014, 2015, we had that offline. Now it's been transferred online, and I was there at the very beginning, helping set up and establish all of the processes. This was one of the first Russian new format schools. The so-called Californian boot camps served as a model, and they are booming. They are popping up like mushrooms after the rain, and everybody's wanting to do digital these days. And there's a huge lack of software developers. Just 11 million software developers, and there's so many more like apps than 11 million, right? So for each app, you don't even have one software developer behind it. So these tools have been around for ages, but the commercialization only came about like 10 to 15 years ago when there was an actual need from the public. Like railways, they would build them to move tanks, and now they've got railways to move everything. So the question is, where would we get the people that would be like maintaining all of these rail tracks? So these camps, these boot camps, are like a way to rectify the situation. we need to see how many apps we have in App Store, for instance, and how many experts we've got available in the market. And then we need to figure out, well, there's a lot more than 11 million people, that's for sure. It's like 500 million maybe. To make sure that there are no bugs anywhere. Like, that's my impression. And even then, it won't cover all of the sector. So 2021, well, slowly from 11 million, we need to get to 500 million of programmers and software developers. And maybe towards the end of the century, we'll get there. I don't think we have an option, in fact. And there are more complex apps to be decided, like if IR is required, and everybody just like throws away their phones, and you'll need the goggles, and you'll need complete interaction. So it's coming, and it will be a part of life, and it will require a lot of employees to back up the process. I don't see another option. Higher education, like university, college education, as I said, you'll know how it all works, but you'll be completely detached. You'll have no idea how it works, how the modern API work, and you'll be able to. You'll either have to start from scratch after graduation, which is just a waste of time, or you'll have to learn all of the modern programming languages yourselves. Sorry. So I have a question. If you were to imagine like this is a technology race that's ongoing, and there is a request of contemporary capitalism to boost the process, because like product development, fighting for sales markets. Well, technologies here are evolving in response to the specific request from the economy. But if you were to think like about digital products not in the modern capitalist context, it's clear why people join these schools, because it's like a promise of a good employment, and you'll be able to make more money in the future, and you'll be able to build your career and make even more money. So people are chasing their dreams. In fact, clearly that's what they're motivated by. What if you were to think about anti-capitalist programming methods that are not pushing, accelerating, but they are like blockchain initially came about, and now it's joined this acceleration. But nonetheless, initially it was like a concept that was based on anarchy beliefs, or Allende, the digital government, this interrupted dream when, well, you could have had planned social economy managed through like this cyber management. What do you think about digital technology programming, which is not supporting business needs, but instead is disruptive, or things like activism, self-organizations, hacking, various structures that are trying to disrupt, to stop this accelerating process, to stop the rush, to. What do you think about horizontal groups, for instance, based on digital production and software development? What do you think about all of this? Ellina, it's a very complicated question. In terms of disruption, to fully answer this question, I guess I need some time to do some basic research. But the first thing that comes to mind, how would you disrupt capitalism if, in order to develop software, you need a screen, a computer, a monitor, a keyboard? Well, like computers are generic. Like in terms of disruption, It's all kind of like been blurred. Bitcoins is a bit disruptive, but banks are starting to use Bitcoins and to patch up their budget gaps after the pandemic. Okay, like Bitcoins, they've boomed, and because that happened, there's a huge demand for new video cards, and they cost way more than they used to. Like it would be 1% the add-on. Now it's like an absurd amount of money. And they're not really correlated with the price of production, the cash cost of the video cards themselves, because, well, it's hard to get them. They get sold out very quickly. If you find like a new video card for 70,000, it's like finding a treasure chest. It's something that's impossible these days. If you make games, nonetheless, you need a good video card. You need some hardware, and it costs quite a lot of money. In this sense, it's hard to disrupt capitalism when you need like to maintain production, to incur production costs to support this disruption. At this point, we can't put together like a DIY computer from scratch. I guess the biggest disruption that can happen these days is somebody would come up with a very cheap video card, which will really save a lot of people, and you won't have to wait. And like the Bitcoin, was killed by the fact that banks are now starting to use it. The anarchy nature of Bitcoins was completely suppressed with banks relying on it to patch up their budget gaps. Capitalism like consumes all of these like technologies, like swallows them up, and like everything that's disruptive. I don't really know much about like these ideas. I'm not really like of the leftist ideologies. The most interesting is the horizontal schemes, and I empathize a lot with them. Perhaps it's not as relevant these days. But again, this is a very rightist kind of idea, like Clubhouse. Clubhouse that was done just for Apple, but nonetheless, it's based on a very horizontal structure, and I like that because you can like reach and connect with people from completely different worlds, from different levels, like social stratas, so VIPs, so like you can get through to almost anybody who you would previously have absolutely no access to, and your paths would never just cross. So there's lots of issues there. A lot of people are really not happy with Clubhouse because it's like an exclusive app. It's not for everyone. Sorry, somebody's got an Android, right? I can confirm that. That's not for everyone. Dania, have you got something to add? Danila? We could talk about the fact that blockchains are an anarchy technology, but it all sounds a bit weird. It doesn't fit in with, well, you've got these crypto anarchists, the so-called crypto anarchists, but they're victims, in fact, to the technology because, like the microprocessors, modern microprocessors, this technology takes back to 1970s with Unix timestamp. That's when it started because that's when they started to use computers to trade on the stock exchange with Linux. So talking about the fact that you can separate computers from what they're for, their purpose, is just a bit weird because what's a computer? And before we got it into a digital device, it's somebody who computes. It's a person who computes, who counts resources. But then at the end of the day, they compute and calculate and they work with money. This was all done for accounting purposes to begin with, and accounting calculations became so complex that the same technology can be applied for video conferencing itself. I'm talking about accounting for Wall Street purposes at the stock exchange. I don't mean like accounting calculations in like 1S. So this whole era, if you're talking about like being able to make a computer that would not serve capitalistic needs, then you have these 12-bit processors that nobody needs, like 7-bit processors created back in the Soviet Union. It's all going to lead to the fact that market is going to have the final word, and nobody's going to want computers that can't address market needs, because nobody needs computers if you don't have a market. Well, surprisingly enough, I think computers are needed first and foremost to trade commodities. And all these Zooms, this is all like a byproduct of these technologies. It's just a byproduct and an extrapolation of these accounting technologies into other spheres and blockchain as well. Like the pages of a document that's signed by somebody. It all serves the same purpose. At least that's what I think. Of course, you can deny this, but, well, either way, it all boils down to the market. And you can't create computers without globalization at all, because the production lines that you need to print microprocessors, like with 3, 5, 7 nanometer technologies, you need spare parts that need to be brought from all parts of the world. So it's impossible to just make it without globalization. If you don't have a free market without globalization, you won't have a computer. Sorry. Like, could you conceivably think about like cybernetics with a non-free market, with a planned economy, or is that compatible? Like, if you don't have any competition, such projects exist, like idealist project, utopian projects, and clearly it's more a matter of like sci-fi. How can technologies evolve in a different economic system, like cyber technologies? Because we did have cyber technologies in the Soviet Union and in other countries as well, but perhaps it's like more of a food for thought. If you have any ideas at the moment, feel free to share them. It always seems like digital tools is something new. It's a step towards something new, towards more justice. This is like a thought that you want to cherish. You want to see technology as something that's part of the left ideology, not the rightist ideology. And technologies, a lot of them do get appropriated by the conservative right, and I understand what you're talking about, Danila, because you're a part of the market, and that's that. So you're like a single organism. But if you've got something to say now, please go ahead. And I've got this one last question for you. Ellina, let me quickly share about Turing's machine. There's this concept of Turing's machine. It's the concept of like the initial algorithms, if you will. Turing's machine is a non-machine concept. The prototype itself is not linked to any ideology or politics. When Sara, you talk about cyber sciences, cyber technologies, perhaps we should switch it to a different dimension if that's possible. Yes, of course. You're not talking about specifically about video cards. You're talking about the science itself. You're talking about various concepts and ideas. And well, in the planned economy, could you have a Turing's machine? Yes, of course. Of course, it's just an algorithm, and it can exist anywhere, and it can perform certain functions, and it can convey certain messages and ideas.
Что можно найти какое-то применение это посредством, ну, то есть больше.
One wants to believe that we will be able to resolve these issues.
Я думаю, что скорее это может быть связано с воображением, с средствами.
But I think it may be rather related to imagination, to the means of imagination. Sorry for putting it bluntly, but this is the only thing that comes to my head, that you can actually create worlds now. And this is not the thing for the companies only. You can create a world, you can think of its structure, you can recreate it, you can update it. And you have all the technologies that can enable it. It's not that expensive anymore. In the past century, that was expensive, but now you can upload a world on the platform. And you can think of the characters to inhabit this world. And you can think of a different economy for this world. I don't mean gaming, I mean creating new spaces. There are platforms for social interaction. And yet again, they also have their own problems. I think you can say maybe the same problems, but from a completely new perspective. Sorry, just recently I was walking around a VR chat, and there were avatars there which were hypersexualized. There was a scandal around 10 years ago about Lara Croft, and there you can create such an avatar for yourself. There are also right-wing, extremely right-wing characters. So this is a completely new world without any censorship at all. Yeah, sometimes there are right-wing expressions that emerge there. But this very option, censorship-free, is important in itself. Thank you very much for your answer. If you are watching us in the broadcast online and you want to comment on what we are talking about, please write in the chat and we will pass your questions over to our speakers. As for cybernetics, again, sorry, maybe I was too harsh in answering the previous question, but the technology we are using now is impossible without the free market. But cybernetics as a science, as a Turing machine, all of these things are really possible.
Соответственно, вот мы можем посмотреть, например, там
Cybernetics is science about information. If you take a look at strong AI, for example, it's also about the flow of information. So it's about distributing information. Basically, the tools are the same, but they are of lower quality, I think.
потому что не будет конкуренции, ну, как мы знаем, и, соответственно, это ведет просто к более низким качествам.
So I think no competition makes the quality poorer. Thank you very much. I think our colleagues do have questions. Kolya and Dina, if you feel like asking your questions, please go for it. Or Anna. Yeah, thank you very much. It has been exciting to follow. I wanted to build on what we discussed yesterday. We talked about different kinds of strikes in digital labor. Do you see any options for the strikes, and how do you think these strikes could be organized in your form of labor? And in this case, a strike would it be about stopping the activity, or maybe it would rather be about creating new infrastructures? And I think Sarah has just asked about that. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that the most efficient way of a strike is openness. For example, my friend has a gaming studio and she had a very weird contractor who wanted he wanted to get something for free. So what can she do? She shared it. She shared this information openly. And this is what bloggers do too. Unfortunately, I could listen to your second discussion to the second day of the conference, but I listened to the first part of your conference with bloggers. If a company, for example, commissions them an integration and then doesn't pay them, they just are open about it. They talk about it using their platforms. And as for their outreach, that is the measure in itself that they can avail to. So this is the resource that will work for them. Making the information public is the way I believe. As for strikes, there is another cool example. Maybe it wouldn't be an example of a classical sense, but both on platforms and on telegrams. When you don't want to work with somebody rude, or when something happens that you don't like, you can block this interlocutor. So this blocking is also kind of production, a production of your own space, of your world on social media. And this could also be dangerous, but this is a working strategy which can be used. This is it, I think. I have an example of a digital strike, which is happening in JavaScript, which I program in a lot. Once a year or even a few times a year, somebody starts a strike and deletes their package from the register. And this is it. and nobody can build anything because everything was based on that package. And this is a widespread form of strikes. If you remove one block, everything will be destroyed. And there are millions of people around the world who make these bricks. And if you exercise too much pressure on one person, then the whole system will be destroyed, the whole internet. So yeah, software engineers do have ways out. They have different versions of strikes. You can just basically destroy the whole internet with just one move. And it happens a few times a year.
Спасибо. А вот тут вопрос спросили, мне кажется, очень интересный и вообще резонный.
Thank you. There is one more question, which I think is quite reasonable and interesting too. Anna is asking, would it be possible to produce video cards without globalization if we go back from the concept of PC to shared networks? What is functioning now is rendering farms. How could we imagine the minimalistic digital production? There is another trend here. Cloud games, for example. When you make a cool game, but not everybody can play it because not everybody has video cards or somebody has not computer. So a cool server, third-party server, will be used for that. Then you won't need your computer to be super advanced. You will be able to engage the external resources. I think that is another way out, and I think we are moving there. I wanted to add one more point, one more thing. I wanted to quote one more novelty. Computer clubs are back. I visited one today. It could be another solution of the problem because it provides one with the space, with cool equipment, and you can pay for the hours you spend there. If cloud services so far is something new, so I think this won't be implemented in the coming days. It's a cool idea which will be implemented, but not right now. As for computer clubs, they are available already. And I visited one today and I thought, wow, it's weird that they only game in there because you can also use it for rendering or 3D modeling. I believe that's true. I believe that's where we're going. 5G internet offers new perspectives and new possibilities. And I'm pretty sure that in the near future, most of the content production will be transmitted to the clouds. Our streams are already rendered in the clouds. So we cannot work fully using only the computers we have. So everything is in the clouds already. Thank you. I remembered another example when the COVID pandemic began. Everybody had good video cards tuned in for computations, for computing how one could solve the problems with the virus. So it was an open call for everyone who had good video cards. They could all be part of this experiment, of this computing. So then the network was used for the computation of academic goals. So there was something shared in it. So again, this is our shared problem. We have to work on it together. As far as I remember, Kola had a question. Thank you very much for your ideas, for your thoughts. I wanted to go back a few steps, and I wanted again to talk about industries of software engineering, which we started to talk about, and I wanted to make a reference to a series of interviews with Dina and I made as a part of our investigation of the Park of High Technologies in Minsk. This is an area which is dedicated to the industrial production of software. We interviewed not only designers, but also testers and other people who are engaged in this work. And we caught the overall vibe that everybody feels the purposelessness, the meaninglessness of what they do, because they're creating something that they can't, the result of which they can't see. And it goes from one year to another. For example, my brother is working in IT now. He adjusts the clouds, he connects cloud computations of one corporation with the computations of another company. He makes these pads. So like he's not really excited, and in 5 years he seems to be doing the same thing. And although there is a lot of hype in this industry, and although there is a lot of money in it, people who are engaged in it are still quite critical. Maybe you could comment on that. Or maybe you see a kind of a way out into a revolution, into fighting back to return the alienated labor to the workers. Yes, thank you very much for the question. Just recently, I watched a video, I think, about professional burnout. And that's true that it most often happens when you can't see the results fast enough. So, for example, if you wash the window becomes clean. The burnout is impossible. You can see the result of what you do. When you code, it's quite different. Well, as for results, if there are mistakes or bugs, you can fix them. So when I do fix them, I can feel the result of what I do. I can see the result. So I can see that something is changing, something is happening, and it is important for me. And this is, I think, the main bulk of what programmers do. It's impossible to work without the errors. But at the same time, since it is impossible to work without mistakes, all you deal with always are errors. So you have to correct errors all the time. And Prind also showed a very good film by game developers. So that was a person who decided to make his game independently. So he set the goal of making it possible in a year. So he might work for 3-5 years. He's doing that alone because it's a non-commercial project, and he feels like doing that. Sometimes these are teams of 2-3 people, but now he's alone. He's working on that. He is waiting for the release. He has a mortgage. He doesn't have any free time, no resources. So there's 3 years he is waiting for his game to be released, and not all games are successful. This is just unbelievable. When I was watching this film, I was so inspired by the people who believe until the last minute into the idea they have, and very often they do get results. But I think this is true for any business. It can either shoot or not. Sometimes you can do something for 3 years to run it to depths. But you can also win, and then you make a product that you're proud of. You also implemented your dream, and you made money. And you are part of the history because you did it. I wanted to build on that. I also wanted to ask this question. I think many of us, even 99% of programmers,
которым я занимаюсь. Ну, чем ты занимаешься? Ты, по сути, разбираешь там мусор, инфраструктуры за другими разработчиками.
So basically what you do is you clean up rubbish after all other developers, or you connect one rubbish to another.
Ты даже не знаешь, что
So
там.
this is a constant eternal flow of zeros and ones, and you don't even know what is in that code, and you're not even interested in that. Your task is to connect one piece to another.
Так как ты, в принципе, не должен понимать, что делает твоя система, то ты не понимаешь и не чувствуешь никакой вообще отдачи.
Like you don't need to understand what the system is about, and you don't feel any return. Server, for example, adjustment, server administering are quite specific jobs where you don't feel any return on the efforts.
Что вот он делает супер дело, нет, ему платят деньги, и он как бы работает на санитарной станции. Ну, как бы программисты...
So it's like people who work on sanitary stations, on cleaning stations, they earn money there, so programmers do that too. If you're a brilliant engineer, you may be a front-end developer, but if you want to make money, most likely you will be just cleaning up after everyone. So this is what we all do. Yeah, so it's like you are a digital cleaner, a digital janitor. This is what I believe my job is. Or you can invest 3 years of your life into a game, and it will be a diamond. And maybe you will get money for it too. Then you have to invest into personal branding too. But if you want to do just programming, then you can do that too and make money. So it depends on how much you want to invest into personal branding to get the return from your efforts. If you don't add any personal branding, then you won't get any return, and you won't be producing something unclear for somebody unclear for big money. We are reaching the end of our conversation. Our time is almost up. So I would like to wrap up now with maybe a futuristic question. So I wanted to ask the next question about your vision of yourself or of the industry. What dreams do you have? The inertia is always inside. However, the system makes one play following the rules. So maybe you could just go through some things that you want to see changed. Technologically, economically, socially. And this will be the last question for today.
что...
Well, it's a huge question.
Ну, наверное, самое важное из того, что я хотела бы выделить, да, что
One thing that I
как
wanted to
вот
highlight
это
here
мы, мы все-таки не привыкли видеть женщин в роли программиста, да,
we are not used to seeing women programmers.
про тот, вот кто-то там тоже в комментариях писал, что
And somebody wrote about that in the comments section. I think that was Anna, that you were talked out of entering engineering department at the university by your parents. So the parents asked you to go to another department. And I think I want for this to end. So gender does not really matter. We need to help children evolve in what they take close to heart. But this is also about the overall state of affairs. It's not only about programming. There are reverse stereotypes too. But we live now in 2021, 21st century, so I want to see it fade to the background. I want to see it dissolve. Sorry, I will take one more minute. That school where I studied, I re-entered the school. It starts from scratch, and I started C from scratch. You are evaluated all the time, and I was evaluating someone all the time. And mostly, my colleagues, other students, had just started learning programming. And can you imagine that? When I check the works of a man, a very assertive man, he's like, I will explain everything to you now. So this is what I want to stop seeing, this attitude, especially in the 21st century. Digital Zooms, chats, digital calls, and we are still living in the past in our society. So I want people to stop judging by appearances, by age, by gender. It doesn't have to influence the attitude, I think. Thank you. I wanted to build on what Ellina said, but to move it forward. As far as I understand, you were talking about code review now, no? Well, I faced code review, which is present in our industry. And this is an extremely toxic thing. Actually, in the industry, there are a lot of toxic things, truly. And for example, I had to cancel code review because this is the most toxic thing that sometimes stops the work for a month. And I think there are a lot of things like this. And they can kill everything. At the very beginning, at the very root, there are scrums, which make you plan for 2 weeks ahead at the very beginning when you don't understand at all what the system consists of. And all of this comes together, and although this is super cutting edge and contemporary, but every now and then the things that are implemented just prevent us from working. And I want to see less of that. And I want to see more programmers among managers, because programmers are few and they're very busy. So those who manage are managers who don't understand anything in coding. Throughout my whole career, I had a programmer manager only once. Hopefully, the new generation will change it. We will have more programmers soon, and the managers will be different. These are my fantasies. But I think for another 20 years, we're going to suffer probably. But let's see. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Lilia Zimakova, for the comments that you left on YouTube from the perspective of sociology and technology research. And I think this is it. We'll finish both our conference and our today's conversation with this. More justice, awareness, and care. This is what Lilia wrote in the chat. Yeah, thank you very much, Lilia. So we're going to end now this conference, and let's keep on fighting for all good against all evil. Let's keep working. This is it. Thank you.
Спасибо всем.